We are good to go. We're just going to re-adjourn the meeting, and I'm just going to exit here for the topic of this, or for the duration of this libraries topic, and Deputy Mayor, who's the co-chair of this committee, is going to assume the chair of it. So thank you, folks.
Good morning, everyone. As Elam's mentioned, we're now moving on to the item of the libraries, item B2, in the paper operating model and opening hours report. Mr. Corbett is going to speak to his report, and did you want to have anybody else join you this morning?
I'll try and fly solo, Chair, until unless I run into difficulty, and then I'll call on others as well. Thank you. Look, thank you, Chair, and councillors. Forgive me if I make a little bit of a prolonged opening to the paper, but I just want to make sure I get the right things on the record before we open forward discussion. I did want to start by apologising for the confusion that we've had around the impact of a no decision on additional casual staff for the libraries. I acknowledge that this has caused some frustration and confusion amongst you and made life difficult for you, but also importantly amongst our public. And I do regret regret causing that, and I'd just like to apologise for any inconvenience that has caused you. The paper, there's benefit, I think, in just very briefly going back over a little bit of the history here. The libraries have always been understaffed. And a little while back, we received funding from NZLPP, which allowed us to solve that problem temporarily. And we hired 6 new staff using that external funding. And it was a band-aid, I guess. Then that NZLPP funding finished, and we used funding on an ongoing basis to fund casual staff that would help us keep the libraries open when there were absences. And then we hoped that we would be able to solve the problem permanently through the annual plan and have that casual pool endorsed, which was address the understaffing. Unfortunately, as we all know, that wasn't possible in the annual plan. And what's more, what happened during the annual plan process was that Carlton decided that they would quite reasonably use their staff, their 3.4 staff, only in their own premises, and they wouldn't be available for general rotation. So we went quite quickly from a situation where we had 10 staff for 4 venues, which was always going to be very complex and would result in a level of service reduction. We went from that situation where we had 10 people over 4 sites to 6.75 people over 3 sites. Now, that is very difficult, because if we take account of leave, just normal predicted leave, annual leave, that 6.75 reduces down to 5.75, which is already under the 2 people per site that we need to operate the library, our library. And then if there are any other absences, on top of those sort of the normal predicted, absences like a hot vacancy, for example, we will be in even more trouble in terms of just being able to keep the doors open and keep the rosters operating. So what we did was what we've done in this paper is we have tried to present to you a roster that we think will work. The blue option in the appendix of paper. And that is sort of the, there's a few options there you'll see, but that's the best effort that we could make with 6.7 staff, which actually is 5.7 staff. And I'm not sure that will please enough people to be acceptable, but we've put it forward. And we've asked for you to approve or endorse the use of some additional money, $50,000, from our operating budget, from our remuneration budget, to shore up that blue roster, particularly in terms of weekend hours. Now, that's our proposal. That would allow us, I think, to limp through to the LTP, where we could consider more significant changes to the operating model itself, for example. That's where we've got to. The paper is sorry, it isn't a review in depth of history. It doesn't make any suggestions about the operating model changes. It's really just a reaction to the confusion that was in an attempt to create rosters that will hopefully please at least 80% of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. I think that's provided a good overview of the paper. I've been quite open around my position on what's happened over the last 3 or so weeks, and how it's all come to be. And I do read this paper, and I am disappointed that it's taken, in my opinion, a very surface level view of the library service, and the options that it's presented back to us. Essentially, all of the options are a reconfiguration of what we already have, just presented in slightly different ways. I do absolutely understand the position that of the impact that Carterton's choices have had on our service, but I don't think that we as a council have done a good enough job of explaining that back to our community. We've not communicated our position or where we are well enough for them to understand, and I don't think we've currently done a good enough job of looking at the overall options yet. But I open up to the councillors for any questions that they may have at this point. Councillor Green.
I guess this is probably more of a directed point to the CE, just to pick up around the impact of having a shared service with another council, and that I assume I'm probably speaking for all of us, weren't really made aware of the fact that our funding decisions would be so greatly affected by their funding decisions, or the fact that the CDC was given instruction to mitigate their risks based on our decision making, whereas we weren't given the same opportunity. Can you speak to that?
Certainly, councillor. So to be clear on one point, one of Carterton District Council's reasons for the adjustment in thinking and working alongside us in terms of the rotation of staff was they hadn't consulted on it. So it was a perfectly justifiable thing that the position that they took. Once they started at the end of our consultation process to get a real sense of the implications, there is a real history behind the resourcing of libraries that we really need to be aware of, and we need to do some real delving into. The very nature of any shared service, and I've spoke with individuals within the council cohort on numerous occasions, just around shared services in general, is that historically quite often what happens is that the emphasis is put on sharing the cost rather than agreeing on common outcomes. And so when the emphasis in this case is around sharing the cost, naturally, if there is an adjustment in one place from anywhere within a relationship, it's going to have an on-flow effect elsewhere within the relationship. And that is, in the most basic sense, one of the reasons why we are in this situation. Only one of the reasons, I might add. For various years, for numerous years now, we have faced significant resourcing challenges within the library's space, as Stefan has already outlined. Whilst I would be very comfortable in sharing with you some of that information, I think it might be inappropriate to be talking about it in these early stages, as they have consequences for privacy, because they touch on things like individual employment agreements and that kind of thing. But I would be very happy to have maybe a publicly excluded conversation around it to help raise your awareness. But we've got absolutely nothing to hide here. The situation is quite clear. The current business model is based on having full staff across the 3 libraries. And the moment that we have any adjustment, as we did last year, we had significant sickness periods with COVID. Historical decisions around resourcing had led to annual leave being accrued at quite a high level for some of our very long-term staff who had been with us for 20, 30 years. So there's a number of influences, really, I guess is what I'm saying, that we find ourselves in a position around now. Yeah.
Councillor Olds.
Thanks for that. I'm a real supporter of shared services across our region. I think that they, if they're adequately negotiated at the time and funded accordingly, then they'll always work. There is no doubt about that at all. However, in this particular case, and I get back to, if we are going to provide a library service in our district, it needs to be funded adequately. And I was a supporter of the additional funding going into this round. And I, like my council colleagues, wasn't aware of the consequences of not having that additional funding put into our library service. It's a difficult one, because we do need to continue to provide the service. What the alternate roster suggests is an improvement on what we were offered originally, but it really is only a slight improvement. The reality is that it's still an underfunded service. It's council, and I appreciate that Carterton didn't consult and therefore are sort of separated from the model. And I say, if the model's not working, then perhaps we need to do a rethink about how we actually function in our 3 libraries across our district. I'm also a little bit conscious of the fact that our 2 of our libraries are service centres for South Wairarapa District Council. They're the front shop window, basically, for customers to come and pay their rates and pay their dog registrations and so on and so forth. And they also have a bundle of knowledge about council activities as well. There's some very good skilled people that provide that service to our community and reassurance. So from my point of view is that we need to probably look at funding, the funding model. I'm not a lover of unbudgeted funding at all. I think that we've seen the finances for the library services, and an extreme amount of unbudgeted funding has been in there to top that up. The additional funding we obviously got through the library services was a bonus, I guess, and we probably thought that our officers probably thought we could probably carry on and get that additional funding, but it wasn't to be. So yeah, I'm, as I say, I'm a great believer in shared services, but if the model's broken, then we need to go back to basics and look at how best we can this adequately to see us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Councillor Plummer.
Thanks. We've got a couple of questions, but the second one can wait. First one, Stefan, health and safety related. So in your paper, part 4, subparagraph 1, you talk health and safety related, and it's 2 lines saying Featherston's standalone site, Greytown's 3-story site, Martinborough has banking hub. Great. Can you please expand on that and say, why is this such a critical issue? Given that I can walk out that door and go into that place next door, and there are people everywhere. And the same to an extent in Greytown, we are currently hiring a facility down the road with empty office space upstairs in the library where we could put council stuff. So I'm not quite sure when you say health and safety related, are you looking at this purely a library issue, or are you looking at it from across the service we provide as council? Why is it so critical here? Because it strikes me that you've taken a very narrow view.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. The meaning, the intent behind that paragraph 4, 1 and 2 was to outline to you that we need 2 people in a site to operate that site properly. So at least 2 people in a site to operate it properly. That means to allow the library to function as a library and to service the demand, the demand from customers. You can't do it. You can't do it with one person. That would, that would be impossible. And from a health and safety perspective, having one person in a multi-level busy library is also unacceptable, because you just don't have a view of everyone that's in that building. You can't keep them safe. You can't consider important security aspects during the day for the running of the business, and so both of those things operate from a health and safety perspective, and just from an operating perspective. When you've got a busy library over multiple levels, you need 2 people in it.
Can I just follow on from Councillor Plummer's question then, and dig a little further into why the idea of use of volunteers, or even the relocation of staff, perhaps wasn't looked at in further depth from this paper. Now, I say that not from a volunteer could easily replace a librarian point of view, because I don't believe for a second that's true. But I do believe that there is a place for volunteers to expand and strengthen service from in any industry, from a point of view that they provide extra bodies in a building, and then therefore address your health and safety issues. They can take on some of that meet and greet, information giving, etc. Duties of and free our trained librarian staff up for that. So why was that pushed back, and maybe not a trial of that considered at this point?
Thank you. We certainly, Chair, have canvassed the use of volunteers in the paper, as you'll see. We've outlined the benefits of running a volunteer program in a place like a library, and there are numerous benefits, as you've pointed out. There are also there's pros and cons to everything, and there are also cons in taking on a volunteer program. It is administratively quite time consuming, resource consuming. And of course, at the moment, we don't have the resource to recruit and manage and oversee and roster a group of volunteers. So what we did in the paper was we brought it to the surface, and we've outlined the pros and cons, and we had to do that because there was high interest around this table, and there was also high interest from our community in the feedback that we received. And we've said that we could certainly provide more information on that as part of another paper or in the future. Given the time constraints that we were working in, we haven't put that forward as an option in the paper.
Could I just carry on a little bit in terms of, you talked about a busy site and so on and so forth. Do we have any data about usage of libraries? What are our busy days? What are our busy hours? When do we see people coming in and out? I presume everybody around this table has walked into the library at some stage. There's been no one in there, and I know that our head librarian is nodding wisely. So to make these decisions as to how Martinborough is only going to be open 3 days a week, how do we choose the day that Martinborough is going to be closed if we don't have the data to say Monday's the day we should close because nobody walks into the library on Monday? Or why do we open at 9 o'clock, for example? Why don't we open at 10 or 10:30? Or if we don't have that data, how do we make these decisions?
I think that we certainly have that information, and we can share it with you. And the use rates and how the libraries are used are one metric that we use in creating rosters. So the answer, Councillor, is that we do take account of that information when we are rostering the libraries. You don't, because governance isn't in the business of creating rosters for 3 libraries. But we certainly take account of that information when we.
No, but I think you'll find that this table is now incredibly interested in all of the intricacies that go into the creation of those rosters, given, as we've already outlined, the difference between the deliberation of the AP decision and the outcome that we find ourselves in.
We could certainly, Chair, provide you with, I did in a preliminary way in an email to all of you, describe the things which were important when our libraries manager was making a roster. And so you've got some insight into all the different things that are going through Annette Beattie's head when she's trying to put her forward rosters together. So you've got that preliminary information, but if you want usage data and detailed information on how the libraries are used, of course, we'd be very pleased to provide that to you.
Councillor Gray.
If it's okay with you, Chair, I'd like to make 1 point and 1 suggestion. So the first point that I'd like to make is, I guess I'm a little bit contradicting what you were saying with the use of volunteers. I think that the discussion around using volunteers to librarians is, to my mind, a little offensive to librarians.
Just to reiterate, I wasn't suggesting the placement of to bolster the number of bodies in, not replace.
So I would be concerned that looking too far down the volunteer path risks diluting services that we can provide through the libraries. That's just the point. And then a suggestion that I would like to, I guess, table, which is likely to be wildly unpopular, but I'll give it a go anyway. We don't have adequate staffing for 3 libraries, but it does look like we've got quite good staffing for 2 libraries. Has there been any discussions about potentially temporarily mothballing 1 library to keep really good services going in 2 of them, and then when we get to the long-term plan, reassessing the funding that we divert to them. And then I guess the suggestion that I would make with that would be that some of the conversations that we've heard here and outside of this room has been that there is some appetite within the Greytown community to move the library back into the original building. And I would suggest that if we were going to put a pause on a library service, that might be a good time to look into that.
Thank you. Thank you, councillor. Yes, the point well taken on volunteers, and we had, of course, through our annual plan deliberations, had conversations about volunteers in the library, that there were very differing views amongst yourselves on the library, on the use of volunteers in the libraries. That was part of the reason why we haven't put it forward as an option, but we have surfaced it as an important thing to discuss. The other point about the quite radical step that we might take, which would be to rationalise the library service and potentially close a library or amalgamate or move premises. I think all of those options should be on the table if we were coming to a point where we were reviewing the model. And there was a mention earlier on that it might be time to look at the funding model and look at the operating model. And at that point, those kind of suggestions would be front and centre.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen, you just made comment about the funding model, and there was earlier comment, I can't remember whether it was yourself or Paul, discussed that the funding that was received by council enabled council to employ 6 new staff, and then when that funding was removed, from what I understand, the 6 staff remained employed, but the funding was sourced from within council as opposed to externally funded. I was just going through the Mayor Connolly had shared with us back at the beginning of the month some financial records going back 4 years, and going over those records, looking at the actual personnel costs from 2019 to 20 was 378k, from 220 to 21 was 471k, and then from 21 to 22 it jumped 290,000k to 761k. Was that a result of the funding being cut and council funding those salaries from within? Was that what happened in that case?
So thank you, councillor, and through you, chair. My understanding of what happened when the NZLPP funding ceased was that the employment of the NZLPP position ceased at the same time. We didn't make any effort to then use baseline funding to fund those roles. That's my understanding, and I'm pretty sure I'm right. Although I have been wrong on several occasions over the past few weeks about
Well, you are correct.
Is that we didn't fund those, councillor. Those roles ceased. And then we were back to the situation that we were pre-NZLPP with an understaffed model. The other question about increase in libraries costs over time, I think you'll find that that's very similar to the increase in costs of all our business units. They've increased at quite a rapid rate, and we've all been through that journey of the annual plan where we've seen the cost of business and inflation and depreciation all contributing to the rapid rise in costs for our business units. I don't think the libraries, I don't believe, finance is here if we need more information, but I don't believe that libraries were any different to any other business unit in that way.
So just to clarify, given that there's been a lot of talk about funding for 6 staff previously and historic understaffing of the libraries, can you explain for this committee why it was that pool of funds for casual staff was requested in the AP over permanent staff that would have shored up the service to a level which clearly it actually should have been.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think at the start of the annual plan process, we came to you as a team with various full-time equivalent requests across our business units. I certainly asked for some extra staff where I thought it was needed. And fairly quickly it became apparent that given the extremely constrained fiscal environment that we were working in, there was very little appetite for the council to be adding staff to its staff numbers. You know, that was the message that I heard very clearly, and I think my colleagues heard that very clearly. So as a alternative to that, Chair, we suggested that we have a casual pool that we would draw on as we needed, and the benefit of that is that we weren't adding FTE to the structure, and we would also be able to use that pool as we required. Perhaps we wouldn't have to spend all of it, and so that was the option that we socialised with you during the annual plan process, and that was the option that was decided on to take to the community.
Just to, sorry. Just to provide a little bit of further clarity as well. The benefit of the casual pool is that if you have a member of staff, there are a number of other obligations that we need to carry forward as an employer, which adds costs over and above any formal salary, whether they are fixed term or whether they are permanent staff. So this was a more manageable approach, and as Stefan has already outlined, it was one that we hoped we would not have to draw down on in its entirety anyway. The second point that I would make is there is only one person at South Wairarapa District Council that is allowed to approve any expenditure under the remuneration budget, and that is the Chief Executive. Decisions around spend and overspend we experienced were progressive over time, and but ultimately the responsibility sits with the chair that I'm sat in. And so historically, those decisions were made by the Chief Executive.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wish to, in a sense, go back to the recommendations that are on the paper, because at some stage we're going to have to come to those. But I will reference a number of the points that have come up in the discussion. So yes, I'm certainly, when the vote comes, I'm happy to receive the report. Recommend that council officers adopt a monthly roster. Recommended roster is listed in Appendix 1. Well, as we all know, just recently, the chair, our deputy mayor, in conjunction with the chair of the Featherston Community Board, issued an alternative roster, and I am certainly inclined to vote in favour of it in conjunction with the deputy mayor's proposal, that we adopt the roster that he is proposing for 2 months, to allow a more fulsome review to be completed, and for officers to prepare some genuine options to the status quo. And the fact that it has been thought through with the involvement of some community board members heartens me that we might well be on the way to, shall I say, finding something that is agreeable, at least for the next couple of months. So that's my view there. The next So just to be clear, I'm happy to vote for the deputy mayor's roster in conjunction with the, if you like, the conditions that she also adds. Now we then come to the question of, do we recommend an additional 50,000 for casual staff? And my answer is no, I'm not happy with that. Firstly, if we go back to the paper that was circulated a couple of weeks ago that Councillor Ealams referred to just a moment ago, basically what that tells us is that the full year budget in the past year for the library service was $1 million. Of that $1 million, $400,000 gets occupied with something that we might broadly describe as internal charges. That is actually greater than the budget was for staff. Now, I think that is somewhat
Interesting.
interesting. And thank you. I was looking for the right word. I appreciate that contribution. I just do not understand why 40% of a service-oriented activity like this should be consumed in internal charges. And certainly one of the options that I would expect to see back would be a split between the personnel costs and the internal costs that more represents, I think, what people think they're getting out of a library. I don't think people think their library service should somehow be subsidising other components of the council's operation. So the next thing that I have to say about the $50,000 is that I think we understand, and we've heard your comments about annual leave accruals, and that obviously there is a backlog of people who have leave owed to them, and potentially, if they don't take that leave, this problem persists into the future. I would be happy, however, to have some of that $50,000 that's referenced used to make sure that everybody's leave accrual comes down to zero, and so that we are starting from now on a kind of a back to basics formula where people use their leave as it is accrued on an annual basis. Now, I do not know whether doing that would, and just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we pay them out for their annual leave. Actually a possibility within degrees, but actually what I'm suggesting is that we require them to take the annual leave that they have accrued, and that as a temporary basis, we use something to backfill from the $50,000, if the $50,000 would be enough to cover that. One of the other interesting things in the report, which I also think needs to be contemplated, is what are the services that people expect from the library? ? Because on page 50 of the agenda, we read that those services now include things like class visits. Somewhere else I read about social media, digital health, etc., etc., etc. I am wondering if over time the services that are being provided have greatly expanded, so that in actual fact, if we go back to people and we say, what is it you actually want in the library? We may actually be providing a number of nice to have things, but not actually part of the core service that they think is important to them. Along with Councillor Plummer, I think the health and safety issues are overplayed. And I'm certainly a very strong supporter of volunteers. I don't think having a volunteer in an organisation in any way diminishes the value that are placed on the professionals. When I go to the local hospital, there are usually volunteers helping people find their way around. I've never heard a clinician say that their presence in any way challenged their professionalism. If you go to Te Tapa, there are volunteers there. In fact, you'll almost certainly be met by a volunteer there. It certainly does not challenge the professionalism of the curators or the technical staff in Te Tapa. And I think it's perfectly possible for us to have volunteers who are clearly volunteers who do not in any way diminish the professional capabilities and respect and honour of our professional librarians. I endorse the Deputy Mayor's views on that as well. And lastly, if we pick up the paper that Councillor Elam's referred to before, it seems to me that over the past 4 years, the library service has never sort of fitted to its budget, frankly.
No.
I regard that, to pick up Councillor Plymmer's words, as an interesting management style. It might be described as sort of wishful hoping and sort of waiting for the gold at the end of the rainbow. Now, this council has heard it loud and clear from our ratepayers, we've hit the rainbow, we've used it all up, there's no other rainbows coming. And we've got to now respect that in regards to services like this. There is no more money coming.
Yeah, I'll make this sweet and sharp. I'll start off with the health and safety thing that Alistair led with a bit earlier and the Mayor just mentioned. I too think health and safety, not only in this case, but in a lot of cases nowadays, is sort of overplayed a bit. We all want to come home safe and healthy, but sometimes it gets beyond a joke where people can't think for themselves anymore. But anyway, the point I was trying to make here is on page, there are all this mentions of health and safety on page 55 on this document number 12. Under health and safety considerations, it states there are no health and safety considerations. I just wanted to point that out. I also think volunteers are a great idea, and to reiterate, to help, not to replace full-time staff. In our annual plan, we were suggested to approve $165,000 to keep the staff well stocked, shall we say. Now we're told 50,000 will be sufficient. Yet there's still 2 days a week the libraries aren't open. I'd like to ask the question, Stefan, you could answer this, I think. So the Mayor just mentioned in that spreadsheet he's got about in-house fees. So if the library has to pay in-house fees of, I think it was $400 and something thousand, are the library being paid in-house fees to the library service for their roles from the other services such as dog registration and that they're actually performing? Do they get, some of the budget from the dog registration and the rates intake and that from doing those services at the library?
If I may, I think there's a number of points that need covering off. And so if you don't mind, councillors, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to point to some of these. Not having, obviously, Deputy Mayor, we haven't seen the schedule that you've proposed that was circulated. We got, it seems, a slightly adjusted email. On the issue of volunteers, many of you may not know, but we did have a volunteer programme at South Wairarapa. And we also had a staff member who managed it. So this took a great deal of management to actually look after this programme, and ultimately it was disbanded because it took a lot of work and it took a lot of rostering, and whilst volunteers offer an immense amount of value in all kinds of services, it needed to be really considered as to how they fit within our operating model. So I'll just make that statement because this is not by any means suggesting that we don't explore a volunteer program. It's how we effectively deliver one, and ensuring that the volunteers that we have who are prepared to work with us do so understanding the commitment and how we can best draw upon their skill set to deliver services to our communities. In terms of the staffing levels as well, I would point out that this is less, and I think it was a point that Mayor Martin made. This is not about changing services over a period of time or them morphing into something. This is about the maturing of our library offerings. The expectations of our communities have changed. The programs such as digital literacy, for example, are incredibly well received. It's always been the case that we've had school programs coming into the libraries and utilising our libraries. As is in the case of Featherstone, they've closed down their own school library, so now utilise our library. So it is a repositioning of the offerings that we are able to provide through the library service for the betterment of the wider community. So it's not the traditional book in, book out type thing. It's that the expectations have changed from the community as well. I will touch on one point because there's such an enormous amount that was just shared, but I do want to touch on the financial management component of it. Ultimately, the operating budget, the overall operating budget that is managed by the budget holder, has been supplemented in part in previous years, whether it be through NZLPP funding or more recently with more gradual draws on the remuneration budget. But this is not in any way suggesting that there's been financial questions around the management of that budget by any means. It is, but there is one point, and that is around whether the rest of council acknowledge the services that our the part of the librarian role that does a service centre kind of function, paying of rates, dog licensing, and that kind of thing. There is certainly no cross apportionment at the moment to libraries in acknowledgement of that. And I'll give you an example of how I've tried to recognise that of late. You know, asking outside of my interim CE role, I've obviously got my general corporate services function as well. And I've been talking with the team about how they can be more widely represented in the libraries as well, you know, so they're actually helping fulfill some of those responsibilities, but it doesn't get away from the fact that we have core responsibilities. Because if you think about this health and safety thing that's been talked about, there's a well-being component to it as well. And if people need to feel like they're able to take time off, many of our library staff have maybe aging parents. We've had quite a lot of this over the last 18 months to 2 years, where they need to be able to support those people back at home. So the well-being focus here, it isn't just about health and safety. It's ensuring that our staff feel able to live their fullest life outside of their working arrangement with South Wairarapa District Council. Those are a few things I wanted to touch on because I could go on for an awful long time. What is clear is that we need to review our library service business model. And an earlier point Councillor Olds raised was around our shared services. And this does cut across all of our shared services, but our library services has come to the forefront in more recent times. And there's absolute appetite, I can assure you, amongst council officers to do that.
Sorry, just really quickly, I'm very conscious of the time. It's now 5 to 12. So I think we'll make some final comments and then we'll move to the recommendations and see where we land with those. So I could do some final comments and start here with Woody and then we'll move around.
Point on your wellbeing, I fully agree with you, Paul, there, like in my own business, the first thing my staff are told, the family come first, so. Fully agree with that. The other little question I had was so we currently have 6.75 staff full-time, that's correct, though? That's.
Councillor, we have 6.75 full-time equivalent. So that's the amount of hours
Yeah.
that actually translates into eight different staff members working different
The part-time way.
hours. Yes, it does. I believe it's 8.
My little math brain started ticking, and so we need 2 staff at each site, so that's 6 staff. The other 0.75 is 39 is equal to 39 weeks. 6 staff at 6 weeks off a year, say with holidays and sick days, roughly, equates to 36 weeks. So we're still having here a spare 3 weeks. I know that's a very simple way of looking at it. That's just an observation.
Yes, I think, we certainly have been doing that maths ourselves. And as I said earlier, accounting for the normal amounts of leave that we would expect in the service for different reasons, and also, professional development. And I'm not sure we've calculated vacancies, but we certainly should. You're dealing with 5.75 through a year, which of course is below your 2 people per level. I would also like to add on the health and safety score, because there have been some questions about that. It is extremely important to have 2 people in a multi-level building. We recently had a staff member fall and severely hurt herself out of hours. And if someone hadn't have by chance been there to assist her, there could have been a much more serious outcome. And if you're trotting up and down the stairs in a multi-level building when you're opening and closing, or indeed you're there with or a member of the public runs into difficulty and is hurt, you need someone else there to help. So I would ask people to trust us when we say you need 2 people in a large building to lead the business function properly. And I think a final point for me, I'm sorry that I'm marching on, this alternative roster, I haven't seen the roster that's been drawn up by the deputy mayor.
It's the same roster that you've provided. It's just and it fills the alternating Saturdays, which was part of the questions I've been asking. So
I think when we're creating a roster, we're mindful of the terms and conditions of our collective employment contracts. We're mindful of the each individual's terms and conditions, how they might have changed over time, the personal circumstances of the 8 different staff members that we're juggling, and also the usage rates and the type of use that the library has, increased customer demand at different times, etc. So any roster that was drawn up, whether it's drawn up by the deputy mayor or by someone else, must be cognizant of all those things in order for it to be effective.
I'll just quickly speak to that. So that's completely understandable. I'll just raise a few points that come from the paper. So in the paper, you talk about the branch has been open for 41 hours per week, a total of 123 hours a week across 3 libraries. You talk about the fact that each site needs at least 88 hours of staff resource per site. And you go on to say that that in total that represents an 11.25 per week shortfall of staffing hours. And yet we see a 6 to 8 day closure of libraries across the 3 sites. We've heard from our community how important the libraries are to them, and that the closures we currently have don't sit well with them. And so based on the paper and the information, 6.75 FTE, we talked about it a lot this morning, factoring in leave, etc., we get to 5.75. But as far as I can tell, based on my limited math skills, we're only rostering 4.2 to 4.7 FTE at any one time. So why are our rosters so conservative, and why are the alternative options so conservative when loud and clear we've heard from the community that they want to see their libraries open more often, and it would appear that we have the capacity to do that.
So I would like to clarify, there are tasks which are undertaken outside, or you need 2 members of staff who are doing the running of the library. There are tasks that are undertaken outside of that, and this is the way it's always been rostered, so this is not a new thing. That are back-end functions where people still need to be rostered on under the current operating model. So the discrepancies that you're observing are to undertake those back-end functions. There is a simple need that they currently staff with current resourcing levels aren't able to run the library and to do all of these back-end functions as well. I met with Stefan, and I met with Annette this morning and explored this further. So it isn't as clear cut as simply saying we need 2 people at a library to run it on a daily basis. There are other functions that other librarians that aren't rostered on to cover the library that are being undertaken as well. And so obviously we haven't seen the proposed roster that was shared, but that's why we couldn't commit to that, because we have all of these other activities that need to be undertaken.
I'm struggling a little bit with the maths here, and Stefan, you might be able to help me. So we need 264 hours a week to cover our libraries, according to your paper, right? Currently, on the proposed thing, you've got 176 contract hours for 2 weeks and 160 hours for 2 weeks. So that's leaving every week almost 100 hours per week unallocated staff time with our current manning. So
That's
what's happening? How are we filling that 100 hours a week of staff time?
Getting into.
Shall we invite Annette to the table?
I wonder if we move to the resolutions, see where we land, because I think ultimately, certainly to my opinion, we need a full review of the libraries. We need to understand all these new intricacies, back office staff requirements and things that not highlighted in the paper. First I've heard of them, to my mind, I see the same thing as Alistair. I see missing hours that could be used for opening. Maybe that's not the case, but I think really we need a full review of the service, including the shared model, so that actually as councillors, as governors, we can make the best quality decisions to make sure that the library service is the best it can be for our community. And that's what they've asked for. They've asked for the best service that we can offer them. And currently we don't have the information to do that.
Could I suggest then we just park this and no need to vote on it and say, you've heard what we've said, go back and perhaps bring it back to council meeting next week?
My only concern with that is we leave ourselves in a position where libraries in Featherston do not open on a Saturday. So they need to, again, to my mind, might be a different view of the committee, we need to do something that sees some opening on a Saturday in Featherston. But I do believe that outside that, we have not got enough information to go further than an interim.
We did use the blue option too.
But I'm also very mindful that all that's done is take Saturday openings from the other 2 libraries. I'm not entirely sure.
I think there should be a review of the management structure here of the library as well, as part of the review that we're asking for. We've talked about nearly $1 million budgets that are here with a request for further funding, but 50,000 just basically so we could open on Saturdays. We've asked for information that hasn't been received yet. We're asking a whole lot of questions we still don't get answers on. You're offering up more information now that we haven't been aware of. So I suggest that actually, we've mentioned a number of times, in fact, everybody's mentioned it, that it's a business and it should be run as a business unit, especially at that level of funding. So I think the management structure of this needs to be looked at as well.
Okay. So I think we'll wrap the discussion there and move to the resolutions and see where we land. So first up is to receive the library's operating model and opening hours.
I'll move that.
Connolly. I think we'll take them separately and see where we go. So all those in favour of receiving the reports, please say aye.
Aye.
And all those against, please say no. Okay, so that's passed. Resolution number 2 is to recommend to council to adopt a monthly roster that sees all libraries open on some weekends and on as many days as feasible during the week. A recommended roster is listed in Appendix 1, coded blue. Do you have a mover for that one, please? Councillor Elams.
I'll move it.
Second. Councillor Gray.
Can I suggest an amendment to that and just take out the recommended roster and just leave it, send it back to officers? You've heard exactly what we've said here, rather than give them an out and say, oh, you said Appendix 1, the blue. Say, you've heard what we've said, go away and fix it a bit better. We're not, I get the gist that not everyone's happy with the options being presented, but I think Paul and Stefan, you've heard very clearly that we're not comfortable with what's proposing. We're saying, find a solution to adopt a monthly roster, open on some weekends, and then say, go away and do it again.
Alternatively, we could call blue the interim roster.
Or could we call,
Because I wouldn't want to see it lasting longer than that.
could we make a recommendation that perhaps yourself with the interim CE, Stefan, and perhaps library manager meet to discuss your paper that you've circulated and the roster option that you have circulated?
Well, I like the recommendation that's come in the Deputy Mayor's paper because it ties two things. Firstly, it provides a roster that I think a lot of people would see as acceptable in the meantime, but it ties it to a 2-month review period for the sort of review that Councillor Old is referring to, that we've referred to, that Councillor Bosley's referred to. And I like the conjunction of those two things. It's very similar.
I suppose the only problem with it, it hasn't actually been tabled at the committee.
We'd have to do something about that.
So it's probably a little bit unfair to foist it on the staff without them having a chance to actually comment on it, I think.
If
I
I,
agree with it, but we need to give some.
I am conscious of the idea of doing a review over 2 months, because we're going to have to resource it. We're going to have to think about how this happens and the implications on our wider shared services approach as well. Whilst 2 months on paper might seem, expedient, we may need a little bit longer because we're starting from scratch here with actually reviewing what is the purpose of our libraries, and we want to do a thorough and proper job. We don't want it to be half cut. So
and I agree with that. I would hate to see that our community left with the roster that we've got for an extended period of time.
Oh, I mean, with respect, the instruction was to go away and figure out how you cut up the 6.75 staff and create a roster that tries to keep 3 libraries open over 6 days. And that's what we've done. I mean, I know there's been questions about, is there hours hiding here and there? I can tell you that definitely is not, and that we've made every effort to make that roster as efficient as we can. So to come back and ask us to do it again, I'd be at a loss as to exactly how I could achieve that. I'm sorry. The blue option, perhaps with some just some temporary spend in order to end hours. That was where we were trying to direct things. I realise that isn't finding favour, but I'm struggling to think how I'd leave this room and create a roster that you're describing.
May I test something with you, Madam Chair? If I'm reading this incorrectly, I'm sure you'll pick me up on it, but is the idea that this is an interim step in order to allow us to do a review and whether it's a 2 or whether it's slightly longer, 2-month period or slightly longer, that will then be allow us to propose a different operating model, a different funding model for libraries moving forward.
So what I'm suggesting is that currently I don't feel that I have enough information. Certainly information has come to light today that I was not aware of, i.e. there's all these hours being used sort of back office that aren't front facing, that are not allowing us to open more often. As you're both aware, I've tabled a number of questions around a whole bunch of things in terms of our library. So I personally, and my committee colleagues may feel very differently when we come to vote, but I don't personally feel that I currently have enough information to make a decision on libraries that I feel will both work within the budget constraints that we have and provide the best possible library service for our communities. And the feedback that we've had so clearly has only furthered what really we already knew, which is the libraries are loved and our communities want access to them. So what I'm suggesting is that to be able to make those decisions, we do a review, a full review of the library service, shared service. We answer as many as the questions that others and myself have had so that we can to make the best possible decision for the libraries. That it may throw up something that allows us to open more. It may come back and say it doesn't, but we have to do these other things to allow us to open more. So in one branch, I'm suggesting a full review, and in the other, I'm saying let's adopt an interim roster that'll get us through that period. Because once that review is done, I would certainly hope that that will allow you to come back with some other options that may or may not change the whole part.
Would you be just picking up one of the interim CE's points? Your suggestion is that the review come back in 8 weeks' time. In terms of the cycles of this committee, we have another meeting in 6 weeks' time and another one after that in 12 weeks' time. Would you be open to the review coming back in 12 weeks?
12 weeks, absolutely. And like I say, I'm only one person, this committee may vote very differently.
2 people.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
So with this, are we going to give them 12 weeks, 3 months? Do we supply them with $12,500 funding, which is the equivalent of $50,000 per year over 3 months to make sure staffing is covered until then, or do we just
certainly a decision that this committee could make?
May I make a point on that? So the $50,000 that was included in the paper, whilst we're at the very start of the financial year, you'll note that I made the decision as the sole budget owner of the remuneration budget to look and try and project for the rest of the current financial year what fluctuations in the remuneration budget might look like, which is, as you can appreciate, is incredibly difficult at the start of the year when we don't know what our attrition impacts might look like when we lose staff and we have vacancy lag. I'm also incredibly conscious about the need to do a comprehensive organisational review in terms of our own future operating model as a council and the services that we provide. And you'll all note that we've started that discussion already as part of the LTP. However, I made the decision based on that. This is not a pile of money that we've suddenly found from somewhere. This will actually come out of the remuneration budget. I would also add that to belay any concerns that the Chief Financial Officer might have, this isn't a separate budget that exists. So I've had to assure her that this is actually something which I feel is doable in the course of the year, but we're not diverting funds from any other budget. This would actually have to come out of our budget for our remuneration. So the keeping it to a 3-month period means that we're able to manage that a bit better, but I would propose that we don't put a cap on it, that we allow us to go away, to look at what this interim measure might look like and to resource it accordingly for that 3-month period within the constraints of that money that I'd also already outlined within the paper.
It's quite an arbitrary sort of amount, like 50 grand, just to sort it out.
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid that was in order to bring something back.
Yeah.
And I felt that something needed to be tabled because we would have ended up going round and round in circles. What you've outlined, councillors, is the need for us to go away and conduct a review. Tick, understood loud and clear. To do that, we need an interim measure, and the current way of resourcing is not adequate in order to, as an interim measure even. So clearly, we need a way of lifting opening hours across the library branches to meet your minimum expectations in the interim.
So, sorry, just to move us back to the recommendations. The current recommendation number 2 is recommend that the interim seat to the council to adopt a monthly roster that sees all libraries open on some weekends and as many days as feasible during the week. Recommended roster is listed on. Yeah. Yes. So let's vote on it. Let's see where we get, and then we can amend it if we need to. Bearing in mind that if we adopt this one, we kind of, it is adopting it in full for the period. So all those in favour, please say aye. All those against?
No.
Okay, so would anyone like to offer an amendment to the resolution or a new resolution to move forward with?
So don't have the wording right at my fingertips, Amy, so don't write anything down. But I would like to suggest that we need to combine a couple of things. One is obviously we do need to have it out there. We need to have something working. I think we do need to tie it to the as an interim measure to get the review done, and I'm happy for 12 weeks to be the time period on that. Because we're not potentially going to exactly vote on a roster, what I need the comfort of is that the roster has been given the okay by the chair, the co-chair of this meeting. In terms of the review itself, I think we make sure that we pick up the part that Councillor Bosley's mentioned about that it needs to include management, a review of management. It needs to include Councillor Old's points, if he's still here, that it needs to include a review of the shared services. And in actual fact, I think it also needs a review of the actual service specification, because I think one of the things we need to know is what is people want the library, but what actually do they want from the library, etc.
They've got a couple of resolutions.
You think I've got two?
I think you split them.
So if I heard you correctly and agree with me if there's anything right, the first resolution is to adopt an interim roster for the period of the review.
Yeah, I think you were saying delegate the responsibility for the adoption of the roster to you two for a period of 3 months.
3 months. And then the second one was
Second one is-
around the review
For
itself.
the CE to organise a complete and comprehensive review of library services.
I agree.
To achieve services.
No. So the first,
Well, then I
the first one is to adopt an interim
No, delegate
delegate
to the chair and chief executive to adopt
to adopt.
a monthly roster. Co-chair.
To an interim. For the. That was mentioned.
Yes.
The period.
Yep, for the period of 12 weeks.
The third one, yeah.
Second one is for the chief executive to conduct a thorough review of the management, structure and operations of the library.
Review.
Of
the
library services, management and shared services. And report back to the council within,
To this committee or council?
This committee.
report back to this committee within, how long do you need for?
3 months.
3 months?
Well, it would, do you want to put the date of that meeting, because it would be November.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the ITS committee meeting in November.
Right, so do I have a mover for the the resolution? No, both of them, so to delegate to the chair and co-chair as well as the CE to adopt an interim roster for the period of 12 weeks or through or thereabouts as needed. For the CE to conduct a thorough review of the library services, including management and shared services, and report back to this committee by the 16th of November of this. 15th.
I'll recommend both of those.
So you're moving,
second.
you're seconding. Lose someone, 40.
John temporarily called away.
Temporarily called off.
See, temporarily coming.
Given,
There we go. Right, it's back.
given comments, because I had to make sure everything's in the minutes, could we say why he was?
And so we've formed the new resolution. They are that the co-chairs and the CE develop a interim roster, and that the CE lead the full review of the library service. Alistair and Councillor Bosley have both moved and seconded, and we're about to vote. So all those in favour, please say aye. All those against.
Yeah, sorry, 4.
Thank you. That just leaves us with one final recommendation, and that is recommendation number 3. It's to approve an additional 50,000. Approve an additional 50,000 from council's operating budgets for casual staff, primarily to support further opening hours on weekends. Do I have a mover for this? No.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think can I suggest a slight tweak to that for the period of for the review? So it's time limited.
Did anyone want to offer a amendment to this? And maybe along the lines of what he suggested, 12,000 for the period of the review.
12,500 for the 3 months, which is an equivalent of 50,000 a year.
We would need to cost it though, so to
Yeah, that's only-
have that in the resolution,
No,
that's really quite limiting.
Kind of like grab numbers out of.
No, which to me ties back to the review. We need to have an understanding.
No.
Yeah.
Can't keep asking Karen and those guys to get more money off the wall, it doesn't exist. Sorry.
Let me know where the wall is when you.
It's not at my house.
I don't think there's much comfort with putting any more money into the library
No.
until then.
Until the review has been.
The review's done, yeah.
So again, just to very quickly recap, the money here was coming out of the remuneration.
Yeah, I got it. Sorry, Paul, I did get it.
So all that this resolution would do is to acknowledge any potential source of the funding for the casual staff for the period of the review. So it wouldn't be an out of budget expense. It would simply be saying that we would endeavour, well, we would have to cover the costs within the current remuneration budget for the term of the review for this interim roster.
I'm uncomfortable with it, but I would leave it if necessary.
All right, I'm uncomfortable, but I'll second it
Okay. So
on the
we
table.
need some words for Amy, because at the moment we're begrudgingly moving and seconding without actually a.
Yeah.
Actually, we haven't moved.
No, so we
There
need,
was no movement.
no, so we,
It lapses.
it lapses. So do we, sorry, so what I guess what I'm asking is, in terms of a new resolution, do we have some words formally for Amy to write down so that we can move and second and vote?
But can I ask a question, Paul? So that $50,000 that was mentioned in that motion, was that for a year? Was that going to be for a per year ongoing? Or-
Yeah, but it was also just an amount of money that was to allow us to put forward an amended roster. So you could, if I may, just propose a new resolution where you you don't mention $50,000, you simply sorry, we haven't brought my other glasses. Recommend to council that additional funds is approved from council's operating budget for casual staff, primarily to support further opening hours on weekends for the term of the review. So it's really just saying that there's an amount of money that will need to be spent on casual staff to ensure that minimum staffing levels are in place when agreed with the deputy chair for that 3-month period only.
Which you will struggle, pardon me, Chair, which I do believe you'll struggle to do otherwise. And in that period of 3 months while we're conducting the review, you know, there'll be significant time drawn from staff to conduct the review. Plus I have one staff member who's going to be very important to the review away for a prolonged period of leave. And this just brings into frame what I've been saying. We've got 6.75 down to 5.75 when we account for normal leave. It only takes one person to be away for a prolonged period of time. We're down to 4.75 over 3 sites over 6 days. It will be a real chore to try and roster with that number.
We need a budget, basically, that an approval to spend on casuals for the period of the review.
Or we close the library while the people are not available, like any other business.
Yes.
I would,
I'm comfortable with that. I mean,
we've already.
I agree.
We've already closed the library so much more than I think people understood would happen when they were consulted. I would hate to further impact that by decisions made here, which brings me back to the reason we need the review, I guess. Ultimately, we need the review to better understand the situation we're in so we can make decisions like this based on hard facts around what do we need and how many staff have we got.
If I'm allowed to say something, thank you, Chair. I believe in the very short time that we're talking about here, the 3 months, that what management have to do is to go away and look at the totality of the budget, the $1 million. They have to look at how much could be reallocated from the operating costs potentially and the internal charges. There's a lot of money there. And we would expect, I think, that would be the first port of call on where these sorts of decisions get funded by.
Could we suggest, I'm not sure when the next finance committee meeting is, but actually ask finance to really do a deep dive into the library's finances. And then allow them to make that decision should they say, because we're looking at infrastructure and services, let them deal with the money. If they deem it needs some money in the interim period, when's the finance meeting?
Yeah, good timing.
But just bearing in mind, bearing in mind that we've just gone through a fine-grained process as part of the annual plan to carve off and squeeze these budgets down as far as we possibly can. And I have done that line by line.
Okay, then so it should be very easy then.
And sat in
Present that to the finance committee.
front of you and explain that as part of the annual plan process. I mean, we can do it again, but you can only wring a cloth a certain amount of hours.
No, that's not what I said. If you've done that work, leave it to the
I
finance
think,
committee and let them have a look at it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the level of discomfort for the committee in approving the ARC fund is that at the moment we're not tying that fund of money to anything. We're not tying it to a roster where we say there are 6 shifts that are currently unfunded. I think if the resolution ties back to the roster and says,
I believe it was 34, if I remember Annette's advice correctly, and I apologise if I haven't conveyed this, but I believe it provided another 34 hours of time to the roster, which we were going to direct towards predominantly weekends, because that was where public sentiment told us to do so.
We are in a situation for you, Madam Chair, that the delegation is going to be to you to agree a roster with myself and Stefan anyway. And until that decision is made on what an appropriate roster is, setting any kind of budgetary amount is, it seems kind of a little backward.
yes,
And the important thing is that ultimately the CE has responsibility over the agreed annual plan's operating budget. Where that money is found, and the only appropriate source of funding here is the remuneration budget, is really my responsibility, as long as it's not an out of budget expense, which it would be a different conversation, where I would come back to you and say, you know, we haven't got this covered. So, yeah, my recommendation would be, just to reaffirm my earlier point, is that it be just an acknowledgement that, you know, we could utilise the remuneration budget for the period of the review,
if needed.
if required. Yeah.
So if the resolution would be for the CE to approve use of the remuneration budget for the review period if required.
Certainly, or even a slight adaptation to the original resolution, you know, for the period of the review. It's putting an amount to it, really. Ultimately, the responsibility for spending the overall REM budget still lies with the CE, however it's divided up.
I think we need to find a way to move on, and is that we've come to 12:30 and we are only at item 2. So we need to wrap this up. So if the so that's
So we didn't. I started playing around with it, but I think, yeah.
so if there was a resolution to delegate to the CE to approve spend from the remuneration budget for the period of the review, if needed, would we go there? Is there an appetite for that resolution?
I would.
You'd move it, but. So. Councillor Gray. Only. All those in favour of the resolution, please say aye. It says,
I recommend to council to delegate to the CE to approve spend from the remuneration budget for the period of the review of library services.
if needed. So we've got a mover and a seconder, and now all those in favour, please
We're
say
not going to go anywhere without it, are we? So,
Aye.
aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Reluctantly, aye.
I shall,
Are you going to ask for the notes?
oh, sorry, noes. Right, I will vacate the seat.
I wonder if I might propose a procedural motion, which in the time that's been taken so far and the significance of what's left to be discussed, that we adjourn this meeting, delegate to the chairs and the CE a time to reconvene.
Yeah, I'll second that, because we've got another meeting coming up.
Right. Those in favour,
Aye.
Yeah. Bye.
all those against?
Saying.
Yeah.